He was 9. The cannon was waiting. He ran anyway. In the middle of a naval battle, the cannon does not wait. The gun crew loads, fires, and immediately needs more powder. Every 30 seconds if the crew is well drilled. Every minute if conditions are difficult. Someone has to run that powder from the magazine deep in the ship's hull up to the gun deck, through narrow ladders and passageways, while the ship is being hit, while the deck is on fire, while men around them are dying. The British Royal Navy's answer to this logistical problem was a child. Specifically, a boy between 8 and 14, small enough to move fast through the ship's internal passages, expendable enough that losing him during a battle did not significantly affect the fighting capacity of the vessel. This was not a desperate wartime improvisation. It was a design decision. Ships were built with the powder monkey's small body in mind. This is their story. To understand why children were the preferred solution to this problem, you have to understand the physical layout of an 18th century warship and what moving gunpowder safely actually required. A ship of the line in the British Royal Navy carried between 70 and 100 cannons, arranged across multiple gun decks running the length of the vessel. Each cannon required a measured charge of gunpowder to fire, contained in a paper or cloth cartridge that had to be prepared below decks in the ship's magazine. A heavily protected room deep in the hull surrounded by copper fittings to prevent sparks, with felt curtains over the entrance to reduce the risk of flash ignition. The magazine was as far from the guns as it was physically possible to be on a ship by deliberate design. A magazine explosion during battle would destroy the entire vessel, so the Navy had gone to considerable effort to separate the powder from the fire. That separation created the logistical problem. Every time a cannon fired, a new cartridge had to travel from the magazine up to the gun deck, through narrow companionways and ladders designed for fast movement under difficult conditions. A grown man with a cartridge case moved slowly through those passages. He struggled on the ladders. He lost time in the tight corners, and time, during a naval engagement where the rate of fire determined survival, was the scarcest resource on the ship. A small boy moved differently. He fit the passages the way they had been built, low and narrow and close. He climbed the ladders faster with lighter legs. He could reverse direction quickly, duck under obstacles, and maintain speed through spaces that slowed adults to a careful crouch. The Navy noticed this efficiency early. By the 17th century, the use of boys specifically for powder running was established practice across European naval powers. They were recruited from orphanages, from the families of sailors, from the dockside communities of port cities where the Navy's reach into civilian life was deepest. Some came voluntarily, or with the consent of parents who saw naval service as a form of support the family could not otherwise provide for a young boy. Some came less voluntarily than the records suggest. They were trained in the magazine routine, the safe handling procedures, the fastest routes through the ship. They were assigned their specific cannon and their specific crew, and then they waited, with the professional patience of experienced workers, for the order that would send them running. Now here is what the job looked like when the ship actually entered battle. The order to clear for action came hours before engagement. Sometimes, when the captain could see the encounter developing. Sometimes it came with almost no warning at all. Everything not bolted down was cleared from the gun decks. Furniture, hammocks, personal belongings, anything that could become a projectile or a fire hazard was moved below or thrown overboard. The powder monkey's role in this preparation was the magazine. He helped bring up a supply of cartridges that would be needed in the first minutes of engagement and staged them in a small leather case beside the cannon, ready for immediate loading. Then the battle began. The noise of a naval engagement at close range was overwhelming to the point of disorientation. Cannon fire on a ship does not sound like cannon fire heard from shore. It is contained, resonant, physically concussive, felt in the chest and the teeth as much as heard with the ears. The gun deck filled with smoke almost immediately. Visibility dropped to the width of a few meters. The crew worked largely by touch and trained habit. The powder monkey's job in this environment was to keep moving. The moment the first cartridge was used and the gun crew called for another, he was already gone, back down through the hatch, along the passage, into the magazine, receiving a new cartridge from the magazine keeper, back up through the smoke, and back to the gun. He did this continuously, for the duration of the engagement. There was no position of safety available to him during this time. He moved through the most dangerous space on the ship repeatedly. carrying material that would kill him and everyone nearby if it ignited. The survival strategies the experienced powder monkeys developed were specific and practical. They carried their cartridges in dampened leather cases to reduce ignition risk. They ran low and close to the deck when crossing open space, where enemy shot was coming through the gun ports. They learned the rhythm of the gun crew above them and timed their return trips to arrive in the brief seconds after a shot when the immediate danger was lowest. Some survived multiple engagements and became, in the grim arithmetic of naval service, experienced. Others did not survive their first. The records do not consistently distinguish between the two. But the most revealing part of this story isn't what happened during battle. It's what the Navy did with a powder monkey who survived long enough to grow too big for the job. Because that moment tells you exactly what the institution thought the child had actually been for. Here is what the Navy's treatment of powder monkeys after the battle reveals about what the institution actually valued in them. A powder monkey who survived his time in service and grew large enough that his body no longer fit the role efficiently had two possible futures within the naval system. The first was reassignment to the general crew, where his experience aboard a warship, his familiarity with the ship's layout, his knowledge of the gun deck and the magazine routine made him genuinely useful as a junior sailor. Some powder monkeys followed this path into full naval careers, and a small number rose to significant rank over decades of service, their early experience giving them a practical knowledge of the ship that formally educated officers often lacked. The second path was discharge, which, for a boy who had entered service at 8 or 9 and spent his formative years aboard a warship, left him poorly equipped for civilian life and entirely without the networks that made civilian employment accessible. What did not happen, in either case, was any formal acknowledgement of what the service had required of him. No pension considerations specifically for the years spent in the powder monkey role. No medical review of the hearing damage that was nearly universal among those who had survived multiple engagements at close range to cannon fire. No formal recognition that the Navy had built its combat effectiveness in part on the labor and the risk absorption of children who had not been old enough to meaningfully consent to the arrangement. The institution kept meticulous records of ship movements, battle outcomes, casualties among officers, and the performance of individual vessels. It kept far less meticulous records of the boys who had made those outcomes possible. Their names appear in crew manifests occasionally. Their fates after discharge almost never. What survives in the historical record are the accounts of those who went on to become officers or writers, men who had the education and the platform to describe what they had done as children. The majority left no account at all. They ran their routes, survived or did not, grew or did not, and disappeared from the historical record with the same efficiency they had once displayed running through the smoke. The Navy did not find this remarkable. It had never considered the powder monkey as someone whose experience required documentation. He was a logistical solution. When the problem changed, the solution was simply retired or reassigned. We don't do this anymore. Not this specifically. Child labor laws in the 19th and 20th centuries, driven by reformers who were willing to make the conditions of child labor visible and politically uncomfortable, ended the use of children in these kinds of direct industrial and military roles in most of the world. The powder monkey was made obsolete partly by technology, the development of more efficient ammunition handling systems that reduced the need for continuous human runners during battle, and partly by the cultural shift that finally decided a child's body was not an appropriate logistical tool. Both changes had to happen. Technology alone did not end child labor. Moral and political pressure had to make the practice unacceptable before institutions would stop using it voluntarily. But the underlying dynamic that created the powder monkey has not been fully resolved anywhere. Children still work in conditions that damage them in industries and regions where the enforcement of legal protections is inconsistent, the economic pressure is severe, and the distance between the consumer and the supply chain is large enough to make the connection invisible. The warship has changed. The cannon is different. The logic that says a small body can be made useful in ways that a protected body cannot, and that this usefulness is worth the cost to the child, is still alive in places the comfortable world would prefer not to look directly. The powder monkey story ends with steam power and legal reform. It does not end with the certainty that childhood is now protected everywhere from the same calculation that put a 9-year-old boy in the path of cannon fire. Before you close the distance between that ship and this moment, consider where the supply chains that support your life go when they leave your field of vision. Consider whether you know what happens to the bodies at the far end of them. The powder monkey ran through the smoke because no one with the power to stop it could see him clearly enough to choose differently. Distance has always been the mechanism. It still is. Here is what I want to know. If you had been the captain of that ship, knowing exactly what you were sending that 9-year-old boy into, do you think you would have given the order anyway? Tell me honestly in the comments. This is just one ship. History forgot to look below deck on. You already know where to find the rest.